Hello and welcome back to the Warwick F1 Show for another week. Today we are going into a bit of an in-depth on a bit of news that was released over the last week, 2 weeks or so, and that is the new 2026 regulations. So new regulations are rolling around for another cycle of F1, and we have just seen the kind of specs be released. So just running through them quickly, some of the more headline suggestions. So the cars would be 30 kilograms lighter, 10 centimeters narrower, have engines with a near 50-50 split on electric and ICE power. And crucially, as well, using fully sustainable fuels. As well as that, the end of DRS is in effect active aero replacing that, and the use of a push to pass style IndyCar electrical system for a boost on straights to aid overtaking as well. So I'm joined here with Chinmay and Callum. We're going to have a quick look at these regulations, kind of what we think about them, what they could be or could have in store in the next 2 years when they are introduced. So I mean, an open question really. We'll maybe go to Callum first. What are your initial thoughts on the regulations? I mean, what do you think? Are they a step in the right direction and perhaps fixing some of the concerns that we have over current F1, or are there issues that still remain?
I think so far it's kind of, I think what's been for everyone really is that it's kind of been a mixed bag in terms of what we think about these new regulations. There's certainly a lot of things that personally I like, and I think a lot of people are really appreciative. Obviously, it's very important that we kind of go more towards sustainability and the kind of net zero goal. I'm sure everyone can agree on that. With the sustainable fuels, that's brilliant, and the more move towards electrical power. And things like the slimmer cars as well, I think that's really important, especially, and obviously we've talked so much, especially since we've just had Monaco, we've talked so much about, are these new generations of cars actually appropriate to be racing around here? And I think it would definitely be a step in the right direction to better racing if we do have cars that are smaller generally, so that overtaking and generally racing around tracks like Monaco is a lot better. The only problem I think I have really is that I wonder if we're kind of ready to move into some of the changes that we're making in 2026, because I think from a lot of what drivers have been saying with these simulations is that they're a lot slower, and that's obviously, I think, mainly due to the part of trying to obviously reduce the dirty air to make better overtaking, but obviously that means that there's a limit to how much downforce these cars can have. They're moving away from the ground effect cars that we've seen since the 2022 regulations, and I just wonder if, although yes, there is a big push for sustainability and all of these different things, I just wonder if the world of F1 is actually ready to make those changes, because we don't want to lose like the speed and the performance of the cars, but perhaps that's just a risk. And obviously there'll be an innovation of how these cars can perform, but I just worry if it's starting off too behind compared to other cars we've seen in the past.
Yeah, and I mean, what are your thoughts, Chinmay? Kind of agree with Callum, or maybe you think something a bit different?
Yeah, no. So my concerns are kind of very similar to Callum's as well, and yeah, I mean, I guess the whole idea of sustainability and moving to synthetic fuels and all that stuff is also a really good step in the right direction, because obviously, that's where the world is going nowadays. It's all about climate change and trying to find these sustainable methods. And obviously F1 obviously is a bit limited with the fact that they can't pursue full electrification because of Formula E is a sort of monopoly for the next 15, 20 years still. So obviously everyone's got to find another method of staying relevant in the modern world. But yeah, especially with the big thing was slowing the cars down. It's quite concerning because especially because obviously F1 is always branded as the pinnacle of motorsport. You know, one of the biggest sort of USPs of Formula One is the fastest cars in the world, the 6Gs a lot, the 6 level Gs that these cars can perform in the cornering. And yeah, I understand what F1 are trying to do, because especially with the need to make the cars a bit smaller and lighter, because especially these cars are very clunky to drive, these kind of gens, because especially of how heavy they are and how big they've also become. So in that respect, I do understand, but I just feel like some of the aero regulations we probably will come on to. There's a lot of concerns by pretty much all the teams for one reason or another that they do seem a bit rushed, and there are a lot of things that can go wrong with these regs.
Yeah, and I think those are my main concerns. I really am not the biggest fan of kind of this like whole design or the whole philosophy that they're going for. I like the idea of reducing the weight, reducing the size of the cars. It's undeniable that the cars have got too large over the last few years, and we are now seeing races where they can't really overtake. I know Monaco is the obvious example, but even at other tracks, where you used to maybe get better racing, you are now seeing just teams being unable to overtake one another. But I think it is that aero kind of aspect that is a real concern in terms of the speed. I mean, active aero, it seems unnecessarily complex to kind of use that to replace the DRS. You've got the new kind of electrical package that really, I mean, hasn't been laid out there, kind of replacing DRS, but not really replacing DRS. I mean, not really clear what's going on there. The new floor that is apparently leading towards, at least Nico Hulkenberg says, the cars are going to have a lot less downforce in high speed corners. Everything, it just looks like the cars are being slowed down far too much, being made too complex. And obviously there are pushes in the right direction with the lowering of the weight, with the lowering of the width and the length, but it's all coming as part of a package that looks really unnecessarily complex. And when you have that complexity, it means that there is a high likelihood in 2026 that one car will come out of the gates bounding away from the rest of the field, and we'll go back into a situation we had in the mid 2010s with Mercedes. We'll go back to a year or 2 years ago with Red Bull, where there is just one team up the front. And especially over the last few years, when we've seen by the end of regulations that you are starting to get these battles in place, like Ferrari and Mercedes at the later end of the 2010s, like Red Bull, Mercedes into 2021, and even now, like it's looking like Ferrari and McLaren are now competing with Red Bull a bit more, and that's only likely to continue over the next year. We could end up with an epic title battle in 2025, and then we go into 26 and McLaren are 3 seconds a lap quicker than everyone else. Ferrari or Mercedes are back to being there, and then if you're just kind of back to that point where no one really wants it, where the races are kind of decided on lap one, and it almost kind of feels like you're making change for change's sake. And there are things, as I said, there are things in there that I like, but there's just a lot of stuff in there that I think is a concern. I mean, Callum, what is there one aspect that kind of really concerns you about the chassis? Obviously, we've known about the engine for a while, the new switch to 50/50 sustainable fuels, and I think generally the consensus is that is pretty good. But what about, I mean, what do you think about the kind of chassis that has kind of sparked this debate?
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with you there in the sense of that it could really affect the racing, and that I mean we've just had a perfect example of how a regulation change can go wrong, where the pecking order was up ahead. The teams were anyone with Adrian Newey, and then behind was anyone without Adrian Newey, and we had that terrible season of Verstappen just dominating every race, and like you say, it only just seems to be getting better, and now we're going to go and change again. I think in terms of the chassis, I do understand. I guess I kind of understand the argument of it being maybe overly complex. I mean, if to be fair, I think if it led to some maybe problems with the cars, however, in terms of it's more difficult to keep more reliable cars. I think in a way, I kind of don't mind that too much, because I think recently we've been getting quite a lot, and in my opinion, too many races where all 20 cars finish. And that doesn't seem right. You want there to be kind of those twists and turns in a season, not just because of crashes, but also because of reliability issues with the car. And it should be that kind of technical battle for the teams, and that should play an aspect into the technical battle of the teams, is who can push the regulations, but also keep their car consistently reliable throughout all of that. And so I don't necessarily think that having all of these components is necessarily overly complex, but I also think at the same time it's not, a lot of it's not really adding much as such, because I know a lot of the big headline for everyone was, oh, DRS is gone, and we were all thinking, yay, no more like artificial overtaking, but now we have electrical boost, which is basically like DRS, but instead of using air, it uses electricity, and so not much really changes in that respect. And so and yeah, there is hopefully there should be some more overtaking, but I think, as in with the active aero as such, but I just think a lot of it that is actually going to make a significant change with the cars, apart from the sustainability, I'm talking purely on track here. It's not gonna, if anything, it's not going to make the cars any different, or it's going to make them even worse in terms of performance-wise, and also could lead to that risk, as we mentioned, of one team completely dominating and leading back to boring races again. And I think I just want them to try once, just to kind of hold fire and see what happens, rather than feeling like they have to make a regulation change every 5 or 6 years, for example, and just seeing what happens. Because, like you said, we got to 2021, it was probably one of the best seasons we've ever seen, and then we changed it up again, and now it's going through that again. So not necessarily with this time, but let's just, maybe after this, let's just, because FIA, if you're listening, okay, this is what you should do. If just hold fire a minute, and let's just let it happen. Let the racing be good for a bit, and then make your changes, and leave a bit longer between changes, perhaps.
Yeah, but I mean, almost, do you think that it's going too far in terms of, maybe, like, even if they do want to bring in changes, it is maybe going too far in terms of changes? I think, well, with these engine, like the 2026 engine regulations have been known about for 2 years. They've been done to attract people into the sport, and we've seen that happen. We've seen Ford now Ford are coming into the sport with engines for Red Bull. Audi obviously entering the sport as well in 2026. So there are already changes. So is it just like when we normally see changes in F1, you would normally see it's either engine or it's chassis. So back in 2014, it was engine. Then 2017, it was chassis. Then we did another chassis change in 2022. Now we're maybe going to engines in 2012. We're going to engines in 26, definitely. And then even further back into the past, it was either engines or chassis. This is the first time that I can remember that it's engines and chassis at the same time. Fundamentally, the cars in next year are going to be completely and utterly different from the cars that will appear in 2026. And I mean, Chinmay, do you think it is just too much change? Whereas maybe just engine would have been fine. And realistically, if the FIA or F1 were going to pick one, it would be just engine, because that's the thing that has attracted all this new investment from engine manufacturers, and they are now coming into the sport as a result.
No, yeah, 100%. I think it's quite drastic that literally just 4 years into literally we're only having 4 years of these ground effect cars, and there's already a very very significant change. In fact, a complete overhaul because we're having, like I said, we've got brand new engines, we've got brand new chassis, brand new, the reintroduction of active aero. Um, but yeah, I mean, I'm going to go a little bit more technical here as well. But so like, the biggest concern I think from teams and from like journalists I've seen as well, is the fact that yes, they want to make the cars lighter, smaller, whatever, which obviously is going to be which is obviously a welcome change, but from everyone, because obviously one of the biggest problems is that the cars are getting too big and heavy. But I suppose the sort of offset that they need, because obviously they're making the tires smaller, they're making the car smaller. There's a lot less sort of reliance on ground effect on the go towards active aero. So it kind of, and the fact they want to make the chassis a lot lighter as well, because even though they want to make the cars about 50 kilograms lighter, the actual powertrains themselves are actually getting heavier. So like you're probably knocking off a good 80, 90 kilograms off the actual like the chassis itself, and the fact that it's coming more chassis focused. The idea that you're going to have to rely on so much mechanical grip to actually keep these cars in corner to begin with may even will probably cause overtaking to actually be harder because of all the reduced drag, and just a very unpredictable car. So I feel like F1 at the moment are taking a ridiculously unnecessarily large risk with introducing these regulations this drastic, this complex, with this many consequences. Honestly, yes, obviously we are looking at the most technically advanced sport in the world, but still, it's even for that. This for Formula One, this might be a lot for all the teams, and especially those with the smaller resource allowance, like Haas and Williams and Sauber, etc.
I think there's two reasons I can think of why the FIA might be trying to take such a bigger risk as they are. And I mean, one is obviously they obviously, I understand that they probably feel under pressure to become more sustainable, and because obviously there are targets that they'll have to, and deadlines that they'll have to meet by certain years to get their cars to a certain level of sustainability, and with that comes the introduction of having a car that's has a higher proportion of electricity power compared to the fuel power, and they've probably had to make changes to the chassis as a result of that. But it could also be because of the dominance that we've seen over the past few years. They probably saw that, or perhaps they saw of what like terrible consequences their regulation changes in 2022 had, with creating some of the most boring F1 seasons that we've ever seen, after what was 2021 probably the best F1 season we've ever seen. Like, such a contrast, and putting that largely down to the regulation changes, which I think is true. I think the regulation changes had a big part to play in that change in excitement and entertainment of the races, and maybe a reason, and maybe they feel that another regulation change is for some reason, now that I'm saying it out loud, it actually sounds very absurd, that the regulation change caused the problem, and they're like, what do we do now? Let's go for another regulation change. But maybe that's what they feel they have to do, because we see this introduction of things like scrapping the DRS, like more like active aerodynamics to reduce the dirty air, and making the cars lighter, making them narrower. They see that they need more from the overtaking side of things and the competitiveness side of things, and maybe they feel that to make the races more competitive, they feel that will come from the regulations that they put in by making overtaking easier, for example, and maybe giving more of a boost on straights with this electrical power that following cars are going to have. So maybe that's kind of some of the reasons that the FIA have as such as to why they may feel that it is drastic to implement these changes now, even though realistically the reaction from at least F1 fans that I've been talking to is quite the opposite.
I think it's not just the reaction from fans. I think for me, it's the amount of like not, I guess, stuff not like officially said, but just the amount of like talking points that are coming out of F1 teams and F1 drivers are all really quite concerned about these changes for various different reasons. I think, well, in the article I was reading, Nico Hulkenberg saying the cars are going to lose downforce, Lewis Hamilton saying it doesn't go far enough in terms of dropping weight from the car. Lando Norris being concerned, obviously, as we've been talking about the potential lack of competitiveness that can always come from a change in regulations, and the teams kind of highlighting their concerns as well. I think there were reports that the car was almost undrivable at the end of some straights on the simulator, and maybe wouldn't even be going that much quicker than F2 cars. It is the fact that everyone has a different problem, and there's also been quite willing to say that they do have a problem about it, and it's everywhere. It's not just one team who you can point to and say, "Oh, Red Bull are saying this. Of course, they don't want the things to change because they'll lose their dominance at the front of the grid." Everyone has a problem, and everyone's problem is different, and everyone has been willing to say their problem. That there is no one seems to be happy with this except for the FIA and except for maybe F1. And you do kind of have to question, like, if no one is saying, if no one who knows, like, obviously people in the FIA and F1 know what they're doing, but if no one who's part of a team who's ultimately going to be affected directly by this, if no one is saying, okay, yeah, these look quite good, everyone is saying, okay, this is going to be a problem, this is going to be a problem, this is going to be a problem. If no one is, if everyone is saying that, then surely you've got to think, if you're the FIA or F1, surely you've got to think, okay, is this a good idea? Because I don't think, like, people are pushing for chassis changes, but I don't think it's the most pressing concern, especially when you've got engine changes coming in 2 years as well.
I think if we can start from this podcast, we can start a movement. Hashtag stop the 2026 changes. Then, as you said, we would get a lot of teams and fans on board with that. I wonder whether, because obviously we've all been calling for stuff in the changes, and like whether it is the more sustainable fuel or it's the better overtaking, and there seems to be some aspect of implementing that, which I guess not a lot of people are kind of, or a lot of people are forgetting because there are these problems with it, but obviously as the FIA know the more technical side of things, they know that kind of, right, if we have to achieve this, then we're going to have to sacrifice this thing or whatever. And I guess kind of one of the main examples of that would be, right, we want to have better overtaking, so we need to reduce the amount of dirty air. One sacrifice of that is going to have to be that there is reduced downforce, because we can't have as many vortices and aerodynamic things, technical term, on the car that can create that downforce and make the cars go faster without producing the dirty air, which makes overtaking and following another car more difficult. So maybe is this maybe the price to pay for the things that we want implemented in F1, like better overtaking and the things that are necessary, like more sustainable fuel and a lower carbon footprint, and kind of, is this what we're going to have to expect from those demands as such? I don't know.
I think it, for me, is at the end of the day, it's all very, very complex. Like, you're losing DRS, you're adding active error, but you're also adding this new electrical system, and like this and that and this and that. And there's so much stuff that is changing. You almost do have to think, does it need to change now? Can it not wait till
That's
maybe
what I was, yeah,
2030?
that's what I was going to come on to. That I think maybe do you think this is maybe a bit too much of a rush to get out these things?
Yeah, yeah, I think that is ultimately. Does F1 always kind of need to update? Yes, and it has done so for every single year of its now. Well, next year will be the 75th year of Formula One. There have been so many changes from decade to decade, from every 5 years, even every 2 years. as well. Everyone has always been about, it's never been really that static. It's always been changes, but it's gradual. It takes place over time. We moved from front engine cars to rear engine cars to adding aero to the turbo era in the 80s, then to V12s, then to V10s in the 2000s, V8s, to the current V6s. It's an incremental stages over time, and stuff does need to change. And I think the push for sustainability with these new engines is very important. But why not make sure that those work first and then look at chassis packages? Especially because ultimately we're not going to give up these new engines, because there are now 6 engine manufacturers who want to enter the sport. You've got Ferrari, you've got Mercedes, you've got Renault, but now we've got Ford, Red Bull powertrains. Honda are making a return. You've got Audi potentially making their own engine. General Motors trying to make their own engine. And if F1 would do the sensible thing and let the Andretti entry into the sport. The engines are here to stay because they are very good for the sport in terms of its investment. I just don't think we need to do more at the moment. Let the engines lie, and then once we've done 2026 and 2027, and we've seen kind of, because the engines, they aren't significantly, I guess, different. It's more of just an update on the previous model. So do those 2 years, and then when we get into 28, 29, then start to look at the chassis, start to look at making the cars smaller and lighter. Just, it's a lot at once, I think, is the if I could summarize it in a sentence, and I'm not the kind of biggest fan of that.
Yeah, I think that's. I think that does summarize it quite well, and that's also something else that we should consider as well. I guess from the perspective of the president of the FIA, Mohammed bin Salem, that we have, what is it now, 2 or 3? I mean, well, in recent years we've had 3 more engine suppliers. Am I right in saying, or 2 or 3 more new engine suppliers coming into F1 with Audi, with Ford, and now the attempt of General Motors. And his payday is going to be looking a lot brighter as a result, probably from the money that those companies are going to bring in. And obviously there is intentions other than that for this regulations, but I guess we'll have to see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, I guess probably in the FIA's defense, the reason why they're going for this drastic of a change is because, yes, obviously the V6s are staying, but I guess because there is a significant change to the electrical side of things with the MGUH being scrapped, obviously the MGUK becoming a lot more powerful and bigger and require a lot more batteries and stuff. I guess the infrastructure around the back of the car would have to be significantly changed as well. So I guess that using that, because there would be significant change to chassis, I guess might as well just do everything in one go. But then, yeah, I guess like we all mentioned, that the complexity of all of it and probably might be a bit too much for everyone to handle, and it's a really, really necessary. And again, the necessary changes have kind of already been done in 2022 with the whole ground effect to make racing much better. The cars do follow. I mean, obviously with upgrades and as teams develop the cars more, the attendant effects will start to decrease slowly, but still we've seen an overall net increase with close racing, good overtaking abilities and all that stuff. We just look at Alex Albon back in Canada, and I guess it's just really about what really is needed to actually improve the sport, rather than just completely overhauling it, taking necessary risks, and probably risk losing the actual whole credibility of the sport.
I think something else we're not taking into account as well is, given my history on the podcast in terms of making predictions, the exact opposite is going to happen, and so we could be treated to, at this rate, from what we've said, the best season in F1 history in 2026, I certainly hope that is the case, but I think maybe with as we mentioned, with the sheer number of changes that is being made in 2026, it's kind of no one really knows what to predict as such, and it will just be a case of seeing what happens when they are introduced in 2 years' time.
Yeah, but I guess it'd be boring to be able to predict everything, and I think that is the big thing. We kind of do have to just wait and see. I mean, have you guys got any kind of final words you want to add on 2026?
No, I don't think so.
Yes, so I'm sure we'll see more news out of this about the cars, about the regulations over the next few months, and we'll be sure to keep you updated. Make sure to check out our other episodes as well. We'll be releasing our Spanish Grand Prix preview and predictions very soon. But for today, that is all from us. So thank you for listening.